Welcome to the June 25th Trips and Traps. Andy Serling along with Richard Migliore.
I think we got some interesting races to look at. A few of them, I think, trips were caused by poor starts. And then there's a trip in the middle of all that horse got away good, so it's hard to understand what was going on.
I agree, and I think it's a good example of making a decision about what you're going to do before seeing what happens in the race. The first horse we're going to talk about, and there's a couple of first-time stars in the show, bookending the show, is the 10 Irish Actor, a firster for Linda Rice, a half to a horse of hers, A.P. Johnson, I believe. It actually won on the turf early. And Irish Actor didn't take much money, and kind of a big horse that I think it's going to take her a little while to figure it out. But she ran pretty well, Richie.
She ran really well, kind of hopped a little bit at the start and then hit the gate. A little slow finding her stride. When she kind of figured it out, she got into contention, made a wide, sustained rally. But you can understand why Cornelia Velasquez decided to go outside. You alluded to it. She's a big horse. Probably not a horse you could stop and start.
Yeah, and I think you have to almost gather. They probably knew she needed a start going in. He realized what happened to start. It was going to be very difficult to win, and he's got to keep the horse out of trouble. And I think when you look at it, because the horse who's run off in the front end, who ran extremely well, by the way, and that's Animal Appeal for Jeremiah Englehart, that horse finishes second. So it's not like this was a race that fell apart or anything, and I think that makes the Irish Actor's performance even better, Richie.
You know, I agree, and I think this was one of the days where we had a little bit of rain, if I'm not mistaken, and the pace was actually pretty strong. So you got to give the runner-up Animal Appeal a lot of credit. But Irish Actor, out of the two coming back, they wind up in the same race. Who do you like?
No, I would like Irish Actor. I have to think this horse is going to move forward because it's not, sometimes you'll see a first-time star. We're going to talk about that with the last race at the end of the show, and there's Irish Actor continue to move outside, where you feel like the horse was cranked up and ready to go, and you're not so sure the horse can come back and run as well in a subsequent start. I don't feel like Irish Actor was cranked up. If anything, they knew he'd need a race, and I just think with racing and time, he's going to get better, or she's going to get better and better.
Yeah, I agree. And the fact is Animal Appeal had a race. This filly definitely ran as though she wasn't quite sure of herself, almost a little bit like the emergency brake was on, but she finished well enough that pointed out she does have ability, and against a similar group, she's going to be very tough.
No, I agree. And I like when you watch races and horses make sustained wide runs like that, and it's not like the race is collapsing. They're the only one you see running. It's almost as though they're running in their own race.
Yeah, well, and again, what you say, the fact that she could make that long sustained run talks volumes about her stamina, probably stretching out a little bit more because Saratoga probably she's going to run back and you either have 5.5 or 2 turns.
Well, that is a bit of a concern, though, because the 7 furlong distance is a good enough distance for routers. I don't see this horse turning back to 5.5. I wonder how far she's going to want to go because in all likelihood, Linda's going to run her a mile or a mile 16th up in Saratoga if she doesn't get a start before then.
Well, I think she'll handle the distance. Now, her size could be a concern up there because you have to be a little handier going 2 turns on those turf courses.
No, I agree. It'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see where she ends up. The next race we're going to look at is a 5.5 or 6 furlong, inner turf race, a tough allowance race where the winner ran extremely well off a layoff for Jimmy Toner. We want to talk about 2 horses. My Caramia, the 4, who has some real traffic trouble in this race and has just been unlucky as we look at that, and I'm trying to clear it. And the 2 horse behind him, they're the horses right there. The 2 Jolene was a Grand Motion horse off a layoff that I think she really needed the race, and I don't think it was a total gimme, but I think they're prepping her to win at Saratoga or going forward. My Caramia is just unlucky.
My Caramia was very unlucky, always kind of bottled up, looking for room. And I think at one point, mentally, she got discouraged. She just got tired of being held up, steadied, waiting on room. And you have to weigh in the mental factor with this with certain horses. Some horses can stay in the bridle and pull for long periods of time, and they'll still quicken. Other horses basically kind of fall apart under wraps, and I agree with you. Jolene had the feeling of a horse that needed a run, kind of finished sneaky okay, and I think will really move forward off the effort.
Grand Motion has lousy numbers off laughs and turf sprints, and I think it's by design. He's using these races to prep them for a race, and they need one. And I think she got something out of this because she made a little bit of run as she angles out towards the outside, and you see her right there. There's my Caramia, who, as Richie said, is just unlucky, and as you said, maybe she just got disheartened.
Well, it seems like that to me. She's never in a comfortable position, and if I think about this filly, she's always done her best running when she's outside in the clear. She's basically searching for room from about the 3/8 pole to inside the 8th pole, and now it doesn't look like she's finishing with any kind of flourish, but at this point, I think she just basically had surrendered.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Watching it, she's a talented horse, my Caramia, and in my opinion, she's going to take some step forward, whether it's at Saratoga or in the fall at Belmont, and whether it happens this year or next year, I have kind of high hopes for this horse. I think she might turn out to be okay.
Well, she's shown flashes of ability, so you hope at one time it all comes together and she shows all of her ability.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's an extreme example, but I think about a sprinter like Free as a Bird, who obviously put it all together last year and had that big run of wins.
Right.
It took her 2 years before she figured out what she was doing after breaking her maiden impressively, first time out sprinting at Belmont.
Well, and also turf sprinters is kind of a specialty. I think they need to be horses, to have experience and to get lucky because they have to negotiate traffic if they're coming from off the pace.
No, I agree, and that's what made Free as a Bird so good. Jolene, look for her to be stretching out for Graham Motion. Now we're going to turn to the 9th race on June 18th, later on that card, and we're going to start out and show you the head-on of about the first half mile of the race, and we want to show you the 7-horse Scooby-Doo. And this was a race that had no pace on paper, had less pace on the racetrack, and Scooby-Doo is a horse we've talked about before that has speed, and it seems to us that the rider just completely took back on this horse from the start.
And this horse broke very cleanly. You saw he didn't really have any kind of contact from either side. He was never hindered out of the gate, and he's under stout restraint. Now, one of the keys to the mile and an eighth turf races on the inner is you have to get your position going forward. This is a prime example of getting your position not at all, basically going backwards to no position.
And it gets worse and worse because you can see him steadying the horse back here, and we're showing it. We're going to even show it in a more exaggerated sense as they turn the backstretch, and there he is outside in that red cap. The rider, even at this point, is continuing to take her back. How can he not realize how slow they're going and realize that all he's doing is hindering her chances?
Well, you basically give yourself no chance. You're wide going backwards into a slow pace. How about breaking clean? And we're going to watch now the actual pan shot of when this horse breaks extremely clean. All he has to do is go forward a little bit, and it's going to sort itself out, and he's going to wind up laying third in the clear. And then the horse that was actually on the lead head-and-head with the eventual winner, Brother O'Connell, bears out. So you're going to slide into that position into second in between them. Now, what good did you do yourself? You're 6 wide, under restraint. You'd have to be Secretariat to overcome it.
No, I totally agree, Richie. And I think that's something that people, when you talk about that, how much the best you'd have to be to overcome it, then people are going to look at the race and say, well, what are you really talking about? You're talking about a horse that lost by 7 or 8 lengths. Why do I really care? It's not impossible that this is a trip that made a complete sort of 10-length or more difference, because imagine where this horse could have done if she was sitting on top of the pace, or he was, as opposed to out in the middle of nowhere behind a slow pace.
Well, he could be in the position where the 4-horse is.
He could be in front, frankly.
Or actually, he could be. But even still, if he just allowed him to go forward, he would have been laying third at worst and in a position to win the race. And I think this is where Trips and Traps is very helpful, because you've got a horse that was 36-1 here, 37-1, that had a difficult trip that a lot of people, I think, wouldn't have picked up on. If this horse had been third, what price do you get next time? The fact that this horse was 8th, you're still going to get a huge price.
I completely agree with that, Richie, and I think that's one of the things I like. I like when I see a horse that's gotten in trouble and had a legitimate excuse in a race. And we're talking about now because very soon the rider is going to send him into a drive and try to circle the field 5 or 6 wide behind a slow pace as they're going at the fastest point in the race, giving this horse even less of a chance. But this is a horse that a trip, I want him to run farther back. I don't want anybody to see how well he ran.
Well, and you're right. He's actually going forward through the hottest part of the race, and now you're extremely wide both turns. And it takes an exceptional horse to be wide on one turn and win. You know how my feeling on it. If you're wide on one turn, you got to save ground on the other. This horse was 5 to 6 wide the entire trip.
I haven't gone to track as to see how much ground loss this horse has, but I'm going to do it right after this show, and it's something you should look at on the NYRA.com website, where there's so many good things to look at. But the Trackers page is very interesting. I bet you this horse covered about 60 to 70 more feet than the others in here. This was an impossible trip by a horse that ran a lot better than it looks.
I absolutely agree. And think about the trip Brother O'Connell, the eventual winner, got. He saved every inch of ground. A horse outside of him that's bearing out, that's not a lot of horse, so basically he could sit there on the rail raiding along. If you flip-flop trips, Scooby-Doo's with Brother O'Connell's, you very much could have the same result, Scooby-Doo winning Brother O'Connell that far back.
I completely agree with you. That Scooby-Doo, I know I've talked about him before. We're going to get the money with this horse. We're going to either get a win with him or get him second at a big price, whether it's late at Belmont or at Saratoga. Do not let this horse escape you. We'll see who rides him next time he runs. Race number 8 on June 19th. Got an email from somebody who wanted to take a look at this race and thought appreciate having this pointed out to us. Disco Partner, though, was just a horse that was unlucky, Richie.
He was unlucky, and this isn't something that's a rider's fault. The horse kind of bunched up a little bit. I watched the head-on a few times with his front end. He kind of hopped at the break, didn't break running. So already he's at a big disadvantage. So what's Junior Alvarado supposed to do? You've got to be patient at this point and take your time and try to finish. And then there's another key moment at the top of the stretch we'll talk about when we get to it, Andy, that I think probably cost him the race.
I have to agree with you, Richie, and you'll see it, and I think you'll agree as well. And what's also interesting to me is this horse, Disco Partner, had won his career debut with some speed. Had run a couple of disappointing races on the dirt this year, but always showing speed. And obviously he's got more speed than he showed here, and the start had a lot to do with his early position. But he wasn't intimidated by a complete change of running style or dynamics, and he still put in, as you're going to see, a tremendous run with trouble. This is a horse that's going to move forward in his next start. He could be a real turf sprinter.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And sometimes it's good to find out that they can use their speed differently because he used his speed late as opposed to early. Now, yes, he didn't have a great trip, but I think this is a great opportunity to distinguish between an unlucky trip and a bad ride. Once he broke slow, now we're watching him lug in behind horses here before Junior can extricate him, and then he's going to settle and really finish. That was the key moment, I thought, that cost him the race, because that's a point where you're supposed to be building momentum, and you're going to see the way he finishes. If he had been able to continue that forward progress at that point, I believe he would have got there. But again, I think it's important to distinguish between an unlucky trip and a bad ride. A bad ride is when a guy does something that's hard to explain, like Scooby-Doo. I can't sugarcoat it. To me, that's a bad ride because there's no thought process behind what you're doing. You have to make a decision. This was one where a horse got off slow and the rider had to play the hand dealt him.
No, I completely agree with you, and I think it's clear, and the horse lugging in on him. And he also actually straightened him out pretty quickly. And as you said, look at what he did when he got his momentum going around the 16th pole. If he got that momentum going at the 8th pole, he was long gone in here. And there's no sour grapes. He actually nipped me for second in the exacta. But on watching it, the more I watched it, it wasn't a tough beat. I mean, the horse should have won the race, and he ran extremely well in there. He's a horse, I don't know how much money you're going to make with Disco Partner, but I'll tell you, he's found a home as a turf sprinter. He's got to win him at Saratoga.
Well, that's the shame of it, and you can understand people's frustration.
Sure.
He was better than 10-1 here. He's not going to be that next time.
No, I mean, that's one of the tough things in racing. When you find a horse like him and you get a big price, you got to cash that day. I'll be trying to beat him next time, but I don't know how hard because he ran very, very well. And then the other thing is, Richie, he's not slow. So I don't think you're going to need a fast pace up front. I think if he gets a little experience, he breaks more sharply next time, puts himself in the game. He just seems to be a real turf sprinter.
Well, absolutely. And now he's going to get 5.5 in Saratoga. They go a little bit quicker. It's amazing how different it is, 5.5 to 6. They actually do go a little quicker. He can be a little closer without having to be in the fray. It makes him doubly dangerous.
No, this horse could be A-OK in turf sprints. The last race is a turf sprint, and that's the last race, the 10th, from Saturday, June 20th. We want to talk about the winner, Ceda Cat, because this horse ran an unbelievable race to get it done. I don't know what he does or she does when she comes back in her second start, but you have to watch this race carefully because it's absolutely unbelievable that she wins with this trip.
This horse never had any opportunity to win until her nose was down on the wire first. The trip was impossible. She broke slowly like a first-time starter will. Looked like she wasn't sure of herself. Luis Saez is riding her to get her interested. Then she gets interested, but now he's hung wide. Had no opportunity to win until this horse won. And my question to you is this the first Trips and Traps horse that won that we're showing?
It's one of the very, very few. It's very rare to show them. And what's funny about it, Richie, is if this horse had finished 10th, I think we might have been showing it on Trips and Traps and said, you know, this was a firster that might have been a little interesting for Joe Sharp that just had such a wildly impossible trip, almost a Scooby-Doo type trip in a turf sprint. And there was a competitive pace in here, which helped. But it's not like anybody else was making a big run from the back of the pack. This was the only horse closing. I mean, look where Ceda Cat is at this point. The orange horse lugging in a little bit. This was like 6-7 wide around the racetrack.
Yeah, and right here is where she really kind of lugged. She's going to change to her right lead. He's going to have to straighten her up. And now when he straightens her up and goes to his left hand, pulls her out, she finds another gear, and they were finishing. They came home in 12-2, I believe. I mean, so what did she come home with? 11-4, 11-3? I mean, she really finished. I thought this was a stellar effort, but interesting that you're absolutely right. If she had wound up 7th, let's say at the right in behind the 10 horse, beaten 4 or 5 lengths, we would have said, this is a horse you have to bet back because look at the trip she had. she overcame the trip and won.
It's absolutely amazing because you talk about her closing that fraction. She did it after losing all that ground, never being in a comfortable position, never getting any cover. A remarkable performance. We'll see if Ceda Cat is the kind of horse that was cranked up for her debut or if she can come back and win her subsequent start. But whatever it was a terrific performance.
It was a terrific performance. It's hard to believe they thought she was cranked up because she went off at almost 18-1 and didn't break like a horse. You know, usually horses that are cranked up break running and find position.
Yeah.
She kind of hopped and bobbled and took her about an eighth of a mile to find her stride. Good performance. The key is, can she go forward off it?
We'll see what she does next time out. Very interested. Once again, we got some help last week and appreciate it, and we could always use some help going forward. It's Trips and Traps at NYRAinc.com.